Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Welcome back to another episode of the Financial Coaches Podcast. And today, Maria and I are going to be talking about how to deal with doubt and imposter syndrome. This is something that I feel that a lot of coaches deal with, especially as they're trying to grow and scale their business, myself included. This is something that's very close to home for me. So I'm excited to kind of take a dive in and talk about, the whole experiences that we've had ourselves and how to navigate past those too. And I'd actually like to just start off with a quote that I actually read in a book today. This is the book that I'm reading is a book called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And it's a book about turning trials into triumphs. And the quote that started the chapter was not from Ryan Holiday. It was actually from a gentleman named Viktor Frankl, which I think is another author that I haven't taken a dive into quite yet. But after reading this quote, I'm like, all right, cool. I got to buy some of his books. So
I'm pretty sure Viktor Frankl was actually someone who was in the concentration camps, and he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. So yes. Very, very prominent author, no longer alive. But yeah, it's very, very good book.
Yes. And if anyone had any sort of doubt or is trying to overcome something, I would imagine that a person that was in a concentration camp falls into that bucket.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, here's the quote. Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be and what he will become in the next moment. By the same token, every human being has the freedom to change at any instant.
That's super powerful. I love that it does not speak to the whole predetermined destiny that so many people seem to think that, I can't do this over here because I'm not meant to do that. That's not what I was made for. Right. So I think that's really fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I also think that it really kind of touches on what we're going to be talking today about as well. And, because he talks about, we all have that decision, right? And I think that when we're dealing with doubt or imposter syndrome, it might feel like it's out of our control. Like it's something that just kind of happens to us and we just kind of have to deal with it. But it's definitely something that is a decision. It's a choice. Whether it's not a choice that it comes on to you, but it's all about how you respond to it. And if you can decide to basically not let it affect you or let it affect you as much, you're going to be in a better spot and you're going to be able to recover from it much quicker. So, I think it definitely really applies.
And I think too, when you mentioned at the beginning of the show that this is something that hits close to home for you, that you struggle with this. I think that every person struggles with this at some point. So for those people who are maybe listening, who are more seasoned, it's quite possible that you used to feel imposter syndrome back in the day when it came to XYZ. And now you've really gotten over that. But that doesn't mean that when ABC comes up that you're not going to start to have that resurface for you. So anyone who's listening today, just realize that this is something that can happen in any given moment. And I think that's why that particular quote is so powerful, because he talks about just being in that moment. And so you might be, just on top of your game with everything. And then all of a sudden a client comes to you with a problem that is absolutely new to you. And you're like, yeah, I got nothing here. And so that's where some of that imposter syndrome will start to creep back in.
Yeah. Yeah. It could creep in there, like with what you said, where it's like, maybe it's just something that's not in your expertise. And you're like, oh crap, like, should I even be doing this? Because I don't know all the answers.
Right.
Which I think all of us know that none of us know all the answers. And yes, you should absolutely be doing this, even if you don't know all the answers, you know?
Yeah. But imposter syndrome is not logical. Right.
No.
So that's part of the thing. Like, we know logically that we don't need to know all the answers. And yet when we're faced with not knowing the answer and we're looking somebody in the eye and they're asking us a specific question and they've paid us to help them, it really is sometimes difficult to not let that illogical thought come into our mind of, if I don't know it all, should I be charging them for this? Yeah,
well, it's important just to remember that coaching is not only a learning experience for your clients, but it's also a learning experience for you.
Amen.
Coach as well.
Well put. Very well put.
Yeah. So what exactly is imposter syndrome? Maybe there's some listeners out there that are like, what the heck is that? and I don't even know. Maybe they have it and they're like, they're going to hear us explain it and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. You know?
Yep. Yeah. So do you have a specific definition that you use, Cody?
I don't know the exact definition of it, but I know how it makes me feel, and the way that I kind of explain it to people, because this comes up in conversation from time to time when you're talking to your friends or a business partner or something like that. But the way that I kind of describe it is that you almost feel like you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And the reasons being is because either maybe you feel like you're not good enough, or you don't know enough, or, you're not able to help people in those capacities, something like that, right? But the grand overarching theme of it is that it's a lie, and with those feelings, when you feel like you're not good enough, when you feel like you can't do something, when you feel like, you're not cut out for it, it's very much paired with another struggling emotion, which is just dealing with doubt, because then you start doubting yourself. And when you doubt yourself, that's when things can get really dark really quickly.
So how do you distinguish then between those thoughts that are a lie and the thoughts that maybe are a little bit of reality? And so I'll just use a quick example. If I woke up today and said, I want to be an NBA player, there are a few things going against me.
Right.
With that, right? If I showed up on the court, I might start thinking things like, I'm not cut out for this. I don't have what it takes. And I'm not sure all of those would be lies, to be honest with you. So how do you know? And I'm obviously using a very unrelated example on purpose to demonstrate this. But how do you know what the difference is? Is there a time when maybe you are over your skis, or that you aren't cut out to do something? And how can our listeners start to distinguish those voices so that they know when one is just this lie talking to them and one is something saying, you know what, maybe you're not cut out for this right now. You do need additional education, or you need more training, or you need more accountability or more help. Do you understand the question? I know it's a very convoluted one.
100%. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Pause, take a step back, and logic trumps emotion. Okay. So if you think about it and you think about the thoughts that you're having, and you're like, no, it's actually very logical that I need to improve in this area, and that's just a fact, then you can then have peace with that, recognize it, and then be like, okay, well, what are the steps that I need to take in order to improve this area? And then take action. But if you take a pause and you step back and you ask yourself, is this logical? Is this an actual fact? And there's even just a hint of hesitancy, it's more than likely an emotional thing. And when you're able to look at it logically in black and white, you can dissect those emotions and kind of transform them into positive emotions or empowering emotions that are going to instead build you up rather than tear you down.
That's a fantastic answer to a very convoluted question. I love it.
Thanks.
So you are very welcome. One of the things I'd like to add to that is to identify a time when you thought similarly and yet overcame that, right? So I think sometimes we forget what we've already overcome, what we've already achieved. And so I would just like to add to the pause and logic trumps emotion to, as you're thinking about that logically, allow yourself to kind of go back and say, when was the last time that this emotion overcame me? Mm-hmm. What did I do to convince myself that that was a lie? How did I overcome that then? And then you can start to replicate that for yourself so that it doesn't get worse and worse. It actually gets better.
Yeah. It's all about experiences, and taking those experiences and learning from them and then applying
and compounding their effects.
Yeah. Exactly. Talk about
we did.
Yeah. And, it's one of those things to where if you're able to do that, debunking the lie that imposter syndrome is, actually becomes much easier, and you're able to defeat it much faster the more that this happens, right? So the more experience you have, basically just identifying the problem and trying to work through it with the solution, the easier it becomes, because this is something that I've personally struggled with for a long time, because everything that I've ever worked toward, and if you listen to episode 1, you'll learn a little bit about my personal story, but I put everything, and I mean everything, into my band and music. We were traveling, recording with some of the best producers in the country, playing the biggest festivals in the country, but ultimately it didn't work out. Then after that, I shifted gears and I started booking concerts. And I put everything into booking concerts, like everything into it. And, I started with a local venue, booking local bands, and eventually worked up to booking an arena and, with thousands of people. But at the end of the day, push came to shove and it didn't work out. COVID hit. The entire live music industry went under. And it didn't work out. So there's a lot of failures. And, when you have those failures after failures after failures, it's very easy to look back at that and be like, why does nothing I do work out? Why?
And isn't it interesting that you take two incidences? Now, granted, you, like you said, and you stressed, I put everything into those and then failed. And yet when you use the word nothing, you said, how come nothing I do ever pans out? And if you were sitting across the table from me right now as a client, I would really challenge you and be like, okay, what has worked out for you? Because I have a feeling that you wouldn't be who you are, where you are, and what you have. All of that would not be possible if everything you had ever done didn't pan out.
Yeah, but that's the thing about this imposter syndrome and with doubt, is that it's very hard to realize that when you're in that moment. Yep. But with those experiences and working through every sort of episode of doubt or imposter syndrome that you have, it gets easier and easier to navigate through it. And now, I look at those times in my life and I'm extremely grateful. Like, I would do those over again 1,000 times, both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. One, because they got you where you are.
Yeah. And I met a lot of people. I made a lot of awesome relationships. I had so many great experiences. I learned quite a bit. I gathered a lot of skills from that. And it all funnels into what I'm doing now with coaching. Mm-hmm. And, I was on a bike ride yesterday and I was thinking about this and I was like, if it wasn't for all of those failures, the coaching business would not be where it's at now.
You're right.
And this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yep. And to that point, one thing I'd like to bring up is the idea of comparing yourself to somebody else. So there's two ways I want to go with that, because I think it really plays into this whole imposter syndrome. And one of those things is that we try to replicate somebody else. So I remember when I had first started, it wasn't because I felt that I wanted to. I kind of felt like I needed to be like, so Dave Ramsey is the person whose program we used in the beginning. And when I first started, I kind of felt like I was trying to be a Dave Ramsey 2.0 is how I described it to people when I was going through my existential crisis. I'm like, I don't want to be a Dave Ramsey 2.0. And that's good that I didn't want to be that. But there was this push, this psychological push to try to be that, because I thought that that's what the world needed. And then I had to realize, no, the world does not need another Dave Ramsey. The world needs a Maria Casillas, and the world needs a Cody Sizemore. And each one of us, while there might be similarities between what we do and what he does and what our listeners do, there is a special little twist from each one of us that is so, so important. And so we have to realize that if we're comparing ourselves to somebody else who's already gone this path, we're not allowing ourselves to be who we need to be. And so that's partly why that imposter thing comes in, because we're like, oh, well, I'm not as good as so-and-so, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm imposing, or I'm posing as somebody else. And then the other just short caveat to that is when we compare ourselves, even if we're not comparing ourselves to other people, but we're comparing our blooper reel to what we actually want to be in the end, I think sometimes that's where that imposter syndrome comes too, because we see somebody who's been very successful and we kind of just illogically decide that they woke up one day and they were a success. And then when we struggle or we don't know all the answers, we have to learn this new stuff, we're like, but how come so-and-so was able to do that? Well, you just maybe have not seen their whole story. Maybe they have 20 years of backlog of crap that they had to go through in order to get where they are. And so I think if we can start to recognize that, it starts to really tamp down that imposter syndrome a little bit. We are a little bit more, I don't want to say gracious with ourselves, but we're more realistic with ourselves at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to comment on that, the world doesn't need another Dave Ramsey because they already have Dave Ramsey.
Right. Yes.
And, so if anyone's out there that's trying to replicate, whether it be Dave or, someone else, whoever it might be, it doesn't even have to be someone who's, in the
famous
financial world,
Right.
Yeah. Or famous, it could be
right.
literally anyone in any sort of world. If you try and replicate them, you will fail because they are there already and
That's
they
right.
do it best because it's them, not you. So you need to be who you are. Now, of course, you can have influence and you can take influence and, kind of have like a foundation to build off of and then grow from there to turn it into something special and unique to you. But you need to be your own person and you need to, offer your own skill set and apply it. In regards to what you said about, them, so talking about Dave, he went through 20 years, 30 years of trial and, to get to where he's at now. It's very, very easy to look at those people and compare yourself to them and be like, man, why does he have 20 million listeners every day? Why can't I have that? And it's like, well, kiddo, because you haven't put in the work yet and you haven't fallen down enough times, like.
Do you call yourself kiddo too?
Yeah. I guarantee that Dave or anyone else who is wildly successful has failed and failed and failed and failed, but they've turned those failures not into a pile of garbage. They've turned it into something that they stand on top of and that they take a step on every single time.
Yep. Yeah, you bet. I think one other thing too is this whole idea of getting from, okay, so you said, that he did all of this stuff and I'm having one of those amazing brain farts right now So we're gonna have to edit this part out. Okay. This really drives me crazy, Cody. There was something about, okay. It won't take 5 minutes. I promise. And I will have him edit out, but let me actually make the note right here so I know what time it is.
You know what's
18.
crazy is I almost had a brain fart as well.
Did you? Well,
I was able to rein it in at the last second. But I had one when we talked to Suzanne. I don't know if you remember, but I probably said
that's why you left. I know.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. But I probably said like 9 times in a row because I was just like,
Well, I don't even think I figured it out. Okay, but there was something, and see, the things are like, it's not even that important, but then I'm like, but I don't know where I was going now. You said it was right before you talked about Dave.
Talk about the failures and building off those.
It was right before you started to say that, and I was going to say it right after that. Damn it.
Something about
this drives me insane.
Being their own version of themselves. Not trying to be someone else.
I was going to joke about how the only exception is that I want to be like you. But that's not what I held back on that. I don't even remember. We don't even have to go there. What was the last thing that you said? It was about Dave, right?
Yeah, I basically just said,
so we can do a transition.
Turning the mountain
pile of shit into something to step into.
Yeah.
All right. Well, since we're pausing and editing anyway, how are you wanting to wrap this one up?
I kind of wanted to share like a Zen story.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of helps with like obstacles. So.
Okay. All right. So what's an easy transition to go from Dave?
So we talked about the garbage turning into the steps.
Okay. I don't need to worry about what I was thinking before, but do you have any specific things that do you want to move right into your close?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay. I wonder if I can actually, no, I don't want to stop. I was going to say, I wonder if I can hit pause, but we can't. So Mike will just have to deal with this. But I should probably talk first. And I'm just trying to think of what that transition will be. Turning to, okay. All right. We'll just go with it.
Maybe just ask the question of like, well, how can someone turn, a bad situation into a positive situation? And then I'll kind of hit it with the Zen story and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, cool. Like that. So you mentioned that, Dave or whoever will take all of the experiences that they have that could have really stepped them back, right? Could have put them back. And instead of having that like bury them into this pile, they use it as a way to step up. What are some ways that someone who's listening today can actually do the same thing in their life? Yeah.
So like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, or not the call, I'm in client mode right now. The beginning of the podcast. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast.
Yep.
I'm currently reading a book called The Obstacle is the Way. And something that I read in that really stuck out to me. This isn't even like a true story. It's just like a Zen story kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to share it with you. So there is this king, right? And, the king had done everything correctly. He has he's protected his people. He's provided for his people. He set them up to be in a position to where they can really thrive. But there's the old adage of, hard times bring strong men, and strong men bring good times, and good times bring weak men, and weak men bring hard times.
Hard times?
Yep. So it's a cycle, right? So in this moment, this king, they're in the great times, but because of that, he's noticed that a lot of his people in his kingdom have become weak or soft in some way. So in efforts to kind of combat that, what he does is he goes to the main road in his city or his town, and he puts a rather large rock or boulder in the middle of the street. Mm-hmm. So, if there was any like carts and donkeys that were carrying goods, they couldn't get around it. It caused like a massive, traffic jam, and it was just very, very inconvenient for everyone in the city, and in particular, the people and the businesses that use that road to operate or travel. And at first, what he did was he just kind of like camped out and just watched the people. And he watched them get frustrated. He watched them, get angry with each other. And they started blaming everyone else, their neighbors. They started blaming the king, saying like, why would the king let this happen? All those kind of things. And everyone just kept going around the rock. And they never solved the problem. And eventually, there was a peasant that came along. And he saw the commotion. He saw what it was doing to everyone. He saw what it was doing to the businesses. He saw what it was doing to the supply chain, which is something that we're familiar with today. And all of these things, right? Mm-hmm. And he was like, why has no one tried to move this rock? So he took it upon himself to move the rock. And it's a big rock, so he couldn't move it on his own. So he thought about it. He's like, man, this is an obstacle, not only for everyone else, but for me, because I'm trying to move this thing, and I just physically can't do it. So he started thinking, and he started brainstorming, and he applied himself, and he's like, I got it. I'm going to grab this big, 2x4, per se, something like that, and I'm going to shove it under the rock. I'm going to use it as a lever, and I'm going to move the rock using a tool, right? And that's exactly what he did. He ended up moving the rock. He got it out of the way. The natural flow of the city to allow it to flourish had been restored. And as he turned around after it putting tons of effort and, manpower and, mental strength into moving this huge rock, he turned around. What's that?
And strategy. And
strategy, yes. Mm-hmm, yep, that too. Mm-hmm. He turned around and he noticed that where the rock laid was a pouch. So he picks up the pouch, he opened it up, and in the pouch were just a ton of gold coins that the king had put there. Alongside those gold coins was a note. And the note had said, with every obstacle, there's an opportunity that is born. So to answer your question, with every obstacle, there's an opportunity that's born. And you can't be the ones who complain. You can't be the ones who go around it. If you want the things that are really going to serve you and be fruitful to you, you need to address it head on, even though it's hard, even though no one else is doing it. Because you never know what might actually be behind that obstacle.
Yeah, that's super powerful. And to bring it all back to the whole idea of imposter syndrome, that peasant was the one meant to move that rock, right? So it was important.
He was like, who am I?
Right. And he was by himself, right? He didn't have any of the resources and stuff. But he did have the resource of, like we mentioned, strategy and, just forethought and just all of the gifts that were given to him. And he was able to utilize those. While they were not material, they ended up turning into something material for him, honestly. So yeah, I mean, if you are in the right place at the right time, it doesn't necessarily mean circumstantial. I want people to hear that, because it's not all about, luck. I've heard the quote, and I'm going to really mess it up, but it's the idea that luck is just when opportunity meets preparedness. Mm-hmm. And he had an opportunity that he was prepared to work through. And so he got lucky, right? And I think a lot of times that's what we need to be willing to do as well. We need to be aware and prepared for those opportunities, and then just be ready for them.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get lucky that way.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing that. I love that what you're reading and absorbing, you're willing to share here. I just want all of our listeners to hear this, that if you want to move the marker for yourselves, this is the beginning of a new year. Let's move that marker this year. Start reading books, right? Whether it's 15 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day or just 5 minutes a day, just be intentional about reading something to grow your mind, because that's how you're going to feel less and less like an imposter. You're going to feel more like you belong in that spot with that person who's sitting across the desk from you or across Zoom or whatever, however you're working with your clients. But yeah, just continue to fill your mind and expand your knowledge and things. I think that's going to be a really important thing as we move into this next year.
Make it your New Year resolution.
Or just commit.
Yeah,
I only make the distinction because so many resolutions turn into nothing by January 14th.
I mean, who they all fail. So
that's right. So if you need to, have a little built-in accountability, join our Facebook group. Tell us what books you're reading. Share some of the insights that you've gotten from those books. The more that we are willing to collaborate with that kind of stuff, the fewer books we actually have to read to still gain the knowledge from all of those others. So I look forward to seeing what's next. I'd love to hear if you actually read Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, Cody.
It's on my list. I'm reading this one now. I have one more next up in line, and then I'm gonna pick up Viktor Frankl's book, because that opening quote, it really hit me this morning.
It hooked you. Yep. Yeah, very cool. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that in future episodes. You guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our host by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching. Music provided by Summer School.